Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Traynor, the Curator of Firearms here at the Royal Armouries. These are some of our Ivor Johnson safety automatic revolvers, and this is Up in Arms. Today we're focusing on the centerfire 5-shot 32 caliber small frame safety automatic hammer revolvers by Ivor Johnson, of which there are three models I have out for you here today. Within the three models though, you have numerous variations. I've counted about 13 so far. So let's begin and have a look at them. But the stars of today's show are a first model, second variation, a second model, fifth variation, and a third model, first variation. But before we look at these, I want to talk to you a little bit about the inventor, Ivor Johnson. Ivor Johnson was born in Nordfjord, Norway in 1841. By the age of 16, he began a gunsmithing apprenticeship in Bergen, Norway. By the age of 21, he'd opened his own shop. By 1863, he emigrated to Boston in the USA because around that time there was a great demand for gunsmiths due to the American Civil War. And it was here where he met a man called Martin By at Wheelock and Allen. The two would eventually become business partners. The two's firearms manufacturing business was set up in 1871. As well as firearms, they produced leg irons, handcuffs, machine tools, and most famously bicycles. They're among the first to start mass producing these items for other people as well as their own business. They did have trouble marketing them though, so they signed an agreement in 1881 with J.P. Lovells, who had the marketing power at the time, and so all their items were sold through this channel. Johnson & By's business partnership ended in 1883, but the contract with J.P. Lovell continued until Ivor's death in 1895. Before he died though, in 1894, he opened his first store, and then more opened after his death. Ironically, by the early 1900s, Ivor Johnson's Arms and Cycle Company bought out J.P. Lovell. Ivor Johnson's Safety Automatic series was the most successful of his revolvers, the most common being the 32 caliber in centerfire, what we have here. The name Safety Automatic though, automatic is a tad problematic today because it means something else in the firearms world. But you've got to remember, back in the 1890s, when these things were being developed, self-loading pistols were very much at the developmental stage. What was meant by automatic at the time is that simply when you open the revolver, the spent cartridges eject automatically. It's as simple as that. Now, in terms of the word safety in the Safety Automatic series, what is meant is that it has a bar ignition system, which can be located about here on the revolver, on the internals. That makes accidental discharge impossible, to quote the marketing of the time. That is, of course, unless you're discounting someone pulling the trigger of a loaded Ivor Johnson accidentally, then it will go off. What the marketing campaign is meaning by accidental discharge impossible is that you could throw it, kick it, drop it down some stairs, even, to quote them directly, hammer the hammer, and this thing won't go off. It's only when you pull the trigger with intent or accidentally pull the trigger that it will go off. So, how the bar system works. Basically, it's made up of three parts. So, the hammer here, let's just open this up. See if we can have a look at the large center hole here where when you pull the trigger, the firing pin will appear there. However, between the firing pin and the hammer lies this bar ignition. So the bar ignition is activated when you pull the trigger goes to the back of the trigger guard, and here we have a sear. Once the trigger hits this sear, the sear activates this bar ignition. So as the hammer's going back and getting in line with the firing pin, you've got the bar ignition traveling up and almost blocking the hammer from the firing pin. So when it goes off, what happens is the hammer comes forward, hits this ignition bar, which then hits the firing pin, which sends your round out. So yes, unless the trigger is pulled, this cannot go off. So that is where the safety element comes into it. So although we're just looking at this type today, the safety automatic revolvers were available in different calibers, centerfire and rimfire, different frame variations, a small frame, there is also a large frame, different barrel lengths as well. The standard is the 3-inch, what we've got out today. And with a hammer, or you could have the hammerless version as well, which wouldn't snag if you had it in your pocket, say. If you want to know more about the variations within the model, I recommend William Gorforth's wonderful book on Ivor Johnson revolvers. These are nice little revolvers, and I think it's quite unfair that history's overshadowed them with the likes of Colt and Smith & Wesson, when actually, when you think about how many were sold, they're quite a successful little revolver. And actually, in the United States of America, during that period, they were known as armourer to the nation's bedrooms. So, although they were not as highly regarded as Colt, Smith & Wesson, they're still not that cheap to buy. So the early ones, you're looking at around $4.50 if you have a look in the catalogue and at the marketing, which isn't cheap for back then, for the 1890s, early 1900s. It's still like a week's wage. Someone will really have had to save up for them. But on the other hand, they're not as expensive as, say, I don't know, a Colt single action army. That's going to be about $12, $13 maybe around this time. So, and then on the other side of the scale, you've got maybe a British import, say a British imported revolver, $2, $3. So the Ivor Johnson is middle of the road. It's not a cheap bit of kit, but it's not expensive. It's doable, shall we say? It's doable. So in addition to people buying them to protect themselves and protect their homes, a lot of shopkeepers bought them in order to protect their stores. Police, private purchase as well. They may have had one of these. But most importantly, personal protection. I mean, people forget there was a time in many countries around the world where you could walk around with a revolver, not just of this size, any size, quite freely and not be challenged. I mean, it was perfectly acceptable at that time to walk about with it unchallenged, to protect yourself from an attacker, a mugger, a vicious dog, depending where you are, a rabid dog. You have the Vela dogs on the continent. These are quite small too. The hammerless version of them fit very nicely into your jacket pocket, as would these, but the hammerless one wouldn't snag, say. So it's perfectly okay at this point in time to protect yourself in certain countries with items such as this. And these are the perfect revolvers to do that. At the end of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, a new trend starts to appear whereby heads of state, monarchs, and other people in positions of power start to be assassinated by the common political protester. Gone were the relations, the blood relations, the clerics, the diplomats who might have, let's say, in centuries prior, had someone assassinated to steer more political gain towards themselves or their families. Instead, in the 19th to early 20th century, you've got the common political protester who is killing these heads of state. And that's a result of the education system, new social and political beliefs, but also because of the availability of weapons such as this. 1892 to 1901 has been dubbed the decade of regicide because during that period, more monarchs, prime ministers, heads of state were assassinated than at any other point in history. One of these figures who was assassinated was US President McKinley, who was shot at the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, with an Ivor Johnson first model 32 caliber hammer revolver. It was a third variation though, this is a second variation, remember. And it is not this gun he was shot with. The actual revolver used in the assassination is with our colleagues in the Buffalo History Museum over in the United States of America, currently on display in their exhibition Continuum. McKinley's assassin, Leon Czolgosz, travelled to Buffalo a couple of days before the opening of the exposition and before the president arrived, and actually bought his Ivor Johnson revolver from a local store, Wallbridge's, allegedly for $4.50. In his confession, which is now in the collection at the Chappelle Manuscript Foundation in the United States of America, Czolgosz says he knew where the president would be because it had been announced in the papers what day he was coming, whereabouts he was visiting on the exposition. So Czolgosz knew that he needed to be in the Temple of Music that day to meet McKinley for a meet and greet, which was basically a long line of people that would keep moving past the president as he shook their hand. So that was Czolgosz's opportunity. He stood in line, he waited, and when his time came, instead of shaking the president's hand, he took out his Ivor Johnson revolver, which he'd already pre-wrapped in a handkerchief, and didn't shake his hand, shot him in the body, one shot, got another shot before anyone wrestled him to the ground. Once he was wrestled to the ground, the revolver was taken off him. So it was only, that revolver was shot twice by Czolgosz. The museum, it's not on display, but the museum also has the other 3 rounds intact from the chamber. They also have the 2 spent cartridges and 1 of the bullets. One of the bullets, we're not sure is the first or the second, actually ricocheted off McKinley. He might have hit his belt button, something like that, not sure. So they also have that in their collection too. The final bullet is unfortunately still in President McKinley. What is on display over in Buffalo with the revolver is Leon Czolgosz's handkerchief that he used to fire through. And there is the powder burn mark on it. It's quite a remarkable thing. If you're ever over there, please do go and take a look. Czolgosz's remarkable confession also states his reasons for killing the president. I mean, we know what the means were, the Ivor Johnson revolver. His motive was because, and to quote him, he did not believe in presidents over us. Now, many people at that time, individuals, societies and organizations also had the same view and would often take up arms, such as these, and rid themselves of the leader in the hope that by doing that, they could bring about political change. On the 14th of September 1901, 8 days after President McKinley was shot, he actually died. Now, this was a great shock to the nation and his doctors, even though they'd not been able to remove the bullet, as everyone thought he was on the mend. Vice President Theodore Roosevelt was rushed to Buffalo so he could take the oath of office and became president. Leon Czolgosz was put on trial for murder and unsurprisingly found guilty, and he was sentenced to death by the electric chair. This happened on the 29th of October, 1901. So there we have it in a nutshell. The Ivor Johnson centerfire 32 caliber small frame hammer safety automatic revolver, and how this unfussy, common, very affordable revolver managed to bring down one of the most powerful people in the world at the turn of the 20th century. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video today. If you are able to donate, please do so. We rely on donations. If you can't donate, it still really helps us if you could like and subscribe to our videos. Also, it'd be good to see you down at one of our 3 sites, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.